Deterrence turns people into objects. Deterrence doesn't provide a very credible justification for the criminal justice system either. Punishing a person for doing something is warranted on deterrent grounds if the act of punishing her makes others less likely to do the same thing. The idea behind deterrence is, in effect, to make an example of the person being punished. Undoubtedly, it's a good thing if people are encouraged not to engage in conduct that actually harms others. But deterrence treats people as things, as objects to be manipulated, as means to the ends of others rather than the ends in themselves. It violates what I think of, at least, as a foundational moral principle, that it's never okay to harm someone else purposefully or instrumentally. That doesn't rule out harming someone in the course of defending yourself or someone else. But in this case, the harm done to the attacker isn't the point. It's just a byproduct of your defensive action. For the whole point of deterrence is to harm the purported offender for the purpose of discouraging others from emulating her behavior. Deterrence also seems morally troubling for other reasons. For instance, if deterring serious harms really were an independent justification for using force, it might be acceptable to impose horrible penalties for minor harms if doing so seemed likely to prevent their repetition. Similarly, it might be acceptable to frame and even execute people known to be innocent in order to prevent future harms. If we believe doing these sorts of things is unreasonable, we have good reason to reject deterrence as an independent source of justification for using force, since, if it were such a source of justification, these kinds of choices would be acceptable. Rehabilitation gives the state frightening power. The state's exercise of power over people through the criminal justice system is often also justified as a means of rehabilitating them. Again, this is an after-the-fact justification. Imprisonment had been around for a long time before state officials took the idea of rehabilitation seriously. But if people are going to be imprisoned anyway, doubtless it's a good idea, from the standpoint of the state, to have a modern-sounding reason for incarcerating them. The idea of rehabilitation is, surely in principle, a good one. It would be nice if people who didn't care about others' interests changed their attitudes and their behavior in positive ways. But giving the state responsibility for rehabilitating people is very troubling. First, it gives the state the authority to decide what kinds of character traits need to be eliminated or encouraged. Thus, it injects the state into a highly contentious area of debate within any society, and expects it to exercise a level of competence of which it's not really capable. Second, it gives the state enormous power over individuals, not only power to regulate their conduct, which is bad enough, but power to regulate their characters and personalities. Third, it gives the state this power without any clearly defined limit. Just what is a satisfactory level of rehabilitation? How long does it take for the right kind of rehabilitation to occur? Who's to say that someone is suitably rehabilitated? There are no objective standards on which everyone can agree, and the person to be rehabilitated can thus be entrusted indefinitely to the merciful care of the state. The profound inadequacy of the existing criminal justice system has led some people to argue that what's needed is a system of justice that is restorative. Restorative justice systems focus not only on restitution, but also on reconciliation between offender and victim, and on the reintegration of offenders into their communities. Restorative justice systems are extremely promising as alternatives to approaches grounded in the retribution and deterrence. I suspect that restorative mechanisms would be available in tandem with systems ensuring restitution in many communities in a stateless society. But there is arguably something troubling about using the coercive authority of the state to foster restoration. State-mandated reconciliation is likely to feel awkward and perhaps to create significant physical and emotional risks for victims and offenders. Restorative justice makes sense, but not as a justification for the state's criminal justice system. Some people need to be restrained. Obviously, some conduct really does harm other people. Some of the time, those who engage in such conduct pose real, ongoing threats to others, and the legal system needs to protect us against these threats. It needs to restrain habitually violent people. This doesn't, of course, mean that anything goes. It's never reasonable to do more harm than necessary. And if this is so, then there's no justification, for instance, for using lethal force against someone who poses a genuine threat to others, but who can be safely and economically restrained. But some kinds of restraint seem to make sense for some kinds of people. This doesn't, however, provide any justification for the state's criminal justice system, or, indeed, for any justice system significantly different from the civil justice system provided by tort and contract law. A range of injunctive and other remedies could restrain persistently violent people. It's possible to keep such people from harming others without the criminal justice system, and indeed without the whole idea of crime, understood as something other than a real harm done to a real person who actually views it as harmful.